Well, I knew it'd already be fun to host you and have you and see you again. It was one of the great highlights of being at Confluence with you this year, was to share some space with you, and there was a tremendous amount of free energy and memory there that we all shared in that time. And it already feels like a lifetime ago because we've had the full season of summer, spring wound down. It was close to winding down when we were there, and now we find ourselves in the season of autumn. And it's been a great inspiration for me in the last couple of years to really take stock as the seasons turn over. And thanks in part to your work. And even though I was first guided to really tune into the culmination of our calendar year, and we can talk about how that is maybe not the whole story of when things really change for us, and still there's so much to celebrate and reflect upon if we have the right spiritual structures in place. And I'm so grateful that I tuned into this woman I'd never heard of before, who had a conversation with Paul Chek about just that very topic, something that is of deep interest to you, it seems. And, as someone who has leaned in so wholeheartedly to whatever mission, whatever purpose was awaiting you in this life. And we all have the choice to deny our missions and purpose, and usually at great pain. I can just tell the great pleasure it brings you to have leaned into the messages that you have been tasked with bringing to this world for us to deepen our relationship to secular time, or cyclical time, I should say. That these seasons and these events, they do go round and round instead of just stacking up in a linear way. And so I actually like to start with, instead of going all the way back to your conception or your inception or your beginning, just lately, where have you found yourself mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, as these seasons have turned over? What meaning do you see, or um, what intentions for your life do you see change over as we go from the super high energy of autumn into harvest time, and as sort of an interlude into what we might expect toward the tail end of December and early parts of January? How do you start to prepare yourself for this wind down? And with that, welcome, Lara.
Hi, thanks, Tom. Thank you for having me. Gosh, yeah, I think the practice that we're talking about, the 13 sacred nights, it really just starts to tune you into these cycles that you're talking about, and help you even notice that they're there in the first place, and pay attention for so many of us who in the Western world are just completely cut off from nature and her cycles. And in a way that's, we were never taught, or, it's just being born into a culture that is so separate from nature. And um, now, 16 years later, that I've been, practicing the what I used to call the holy nights, and now call the sacred nights. As the weather starts to shift, I notice it more. I notice that the mornings are a little more damp or a little cooler, that the evenings are a little more cool. I notice that the seasons are shifting, and my awareness starts to shift towards sort of reflecting on the seasons gone by, on the year gone by. In some ways, it almost makes time pass more swiftly, because I go, oh my goodness, we're coming back up to a new cycle again already, and it's this sacred night cycle is we're already 3/4 of the way through. How did
Yeah.
that happen? So in a way, it sort of emphasizes the passing of time. But I get more excited now. I look forward to going back into the darkness, where I think previously, before learning this practice, it was just kind of a bummer. I was like the classic California endless summer girl, and it was like, oh, it's going to be dark, and it's going to get dark at 4:30, and and it's going to be cold, and
Yeah.
so for me, this practice has given me a whole new way of looking forward to and honoring the darkness, and honoring the gifts that it brings, as opposed to just resisting or just waiting, and can't wait till it's over, or can't wait till the light starts to come back. It's really I look forward to it now, because I see that it's this opportunity to rest, rejuvenate, reset, connect, with that something greater, God, soul, source, the field, however you name that. Um, it really is legitimately a magical time. The window is so real. And so for me, it's an opportunity to plug in, and in a way that you know, before learning this practice, just went right over my head and just rolled right on past me without me even recognizing that there was an opportunity there. So yeah. So when we creep into autumn, rather than just, oh, it's getting cold and dark, it's like, oh, the sacred nights are coming. Okay, this is the end of the year. Wow, what's the richness? What's the harvest that I'm taking from this past cycle? What are the beautiful things that have bloomed in my life, and what can I take with me before diving back into that womb of winter? That radiant darkness to instigate a new cycle.
Radiant darkness, is that something from your own lexicon, or does that have a source anywhere
Yeah,
else?
yeah, no, no.
It's
I
okay
think
if
that's just,
plagiarizing is encouraged, so no
if
sweat.
it's plagiarism, it's accidental or subconscious. It's a
Yeah.
phrase that I use often. I often talk about the womb of winter, planting our dream seeds in the womb of winter, or the fertile darkness, or the
Mhm.
radiant darkness. Right? When I think of radiant darkness, if you think of of true darkness, like if you've ever been in a room where the light suddenly got shut off and you were in the pitch black, it's not completely black. There's little filaments of color, right? And so,
Mhm.
to me, that experience is a metaphor for the infinite, right? There's where we think of outer space as empty, and yet, was it Richard Feynman who said that there's enough energy in a cubic yard, or I forget what,
Mm.
of empty, quote, empty space, to boil all the oceans all over the earth, and so
Yeah.
so that emptiness is overflowing with consciousness, energy, potential, infinite possibility, right? It's And that is the gift of the solstice season. That's the gift of midwinter. That's the gift of the darkness, is the unknown, the infinite possibility, right? So that's what we are allowing ourselves to sink into during the 13 sacred nights ritual. We're allowing ourselves uh, to dive into the radiant darkness, the unknown, the infinite possibility, so that a new dream, a new spark, a new spark of light and life, can emerge from that darkness, a new inspiration for the coming cycle. It's the rebirth of the light, as above, so below, as without, so within. Just as the light is reborn on the horizon externally, the light also is reborn internally during that season of darkness. So, yeah.
Well said. I'm glad. I just my ears perked up when I heard that, because I've certainly had that resistance, and I appreciated your candid admission of, chasing that eternal summer, and the dread that comes with shorter days. And I mean, and I don't know how much homework you've done on daylight savings and all that. It's really not the full picture, and I don't profess to either. It is a very it is a rather arbitrary, mechanistic, human-born decision to
I
change
don't know
clocks.
I've never met a person, an actual human, who thinks that daylight savings is a good
No,
idea.
it's a huge trip. It's definitely, and
Yeah.
I'm not prescribing it to any sort of malice, although it could be. I'm doing my best to get away from externalizing they and them and people who want us, tired and broken and all that. There is some of that, and whatever the history for daylight savings is, it is certainly not indicative of sky clock and sun and moon and astrological cycles and all that. So I mean, but we are governed by clocks and other milestones throughout the year. I mean, I've, especially now with my role coaching tennis, I just see. I was witness to some of the early dread setting in of back to school. Well, it's two sides of the
Mm.
spectrum. Some parents were dreading back to school, and others were saying, "Oh my, I can't wait to have my kids,
Right.
babysat for several hours a day." And I have sympathy for all of that. But those are usually the cycles that most people are tuned into.
Yes.
And then the winter becomes. I mean, not much change. We economically, nationally, relationally, in a lot of ways, personally, are after the eternal summer, where not much changes, as you've highlighted before, between what we do in the heart of July versus December. I mean, you're still,
Yes.
you know, playing sports late at night. There's still homework. There's still job. Like you know, whatever our circadian rhythms are, they seem beholden to whatever our obligations that might take priority. And I found, thanks to your guidance and thanks to these practices as well, that to surrender somewhat to the darkness, that I do not have to be as active and performative because I have other parts of the year to do that. Before we highlight some of the winter of our lives and what that has in store, what does summer mean and look like for you? I mean, are you traveling more? Are you doing more? I mean, how do you tune into that energy, and what was this past summer especially like for you?
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to echo that yes, our culture is a culture of perpetual push, right? And never ending productivity and more, 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 always more, push, buy more, work more, produce more, And so yeah, aligning with these cycles is beginning to allow yourself to to engage in this natural rhythm of pulsing in and out that we see in nature all around us, whether it's the cycle of the year, the solar cycle from winter, spring, summer, fall, to the lunar cycles of full moon to new moon, more light to less light to darkness, to the daily cycles of
Yeah.
sunrise and sunset. So so I just wanted to echo that. But yeah, in the summertime, we're living the dream that we planted in the darkness, right? And so we are just look at nature. What's nature doing? Nature is in full bloom, right? That everything is fully expanded, and so our bodies and our psyches mirror what nature is doing. We are a part of these cycles. We're a part of nature. We're a part of this earth. We're connected to it all. We're connected to the cosmos. We're connected to all these things in a way that ancient cultures really recognized and lived into. They lived in it.
Yeah.
They were part of these cycles. They didn't separate themselves. And of course, like I've already mentioned, we in the modern world do. And most of us unknowingly, because we've just been born into it. So we haven't even
Yeah.
questioned it. It's the like, how do you tell a to fish, to I don't know, find the water, whatever that metaphor is. And so yeah, in the summertime, I personally, my daughter, who is just turned 17, is a passionate bluegrass musician, and so that tends to be festival season in the
Yeah.
last
Yeah.
handful of years.
Yeah.
So I am on a constant road trip most summers in the last 4 years. Festival hopping, honestly, which is quite expansive.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for the life that my daughter and I have. I've homeschooled her from the very beginning. She plays 6 instruments. She's now the California Bluegrass Association youth ambassador. She's plays classical harp and adult orchestras. I mean, she's just so passionate and so gifted. And
And
I'm
and
so
just briefly, Laura, I have a distinct memory of enjoying the way that you spoke about your daughter when we were together at Confluence, like that. I know how parents, have that the sin of pride about their children at times, but just like you are now. I mean, that richness of her
you
life,
know
that it was special to witness.
Yeah, homeschooling has been such a gift, and I do mention to on the right platforms and right communities. If anybody's on the edge and they just want to chat with somebody, I'm happy to have a conversation. Just with any parents that is considering homeschooling, but maybe a little nervous or feeling a little like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do it all? It's been the greatest gift for so many reasons, but largely I think. Just because she was given the luxury of the time and space to pursue what her true gift is and what she's really passionate about and why she's here. And I wish every child had that opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so summertime, we're festival hopping these days, and yeah, you're just there's more hours in the day. You're outside more often. Typically, depending on where you live, the weather lends itself to more outdoor time. So you are physically more active. You're awake more hours, and just really leaning into that. And then again, when you become aware of these cycles, uh, you can actually increase your alignment with these rhythms, right? Which is in and of itself incredibly empowering on an individual level. I often say one of my core underlying philosophies is the more we align with nature, the more we align with our own highest human potential. And I think that's something, our human potential is something that has been covered up and poisoned in so many ways, you know. And so it sounds so simple, but just beginning to pay attention to nature is so incredibly powerful.
Certainly. And it's reminding me of a tenet from Rudolf Steiner that, and I am going to do my best to do justice to this. I learned this from a virtual teacher of mine, Edmund Knighton, who's long been a student of Steiner principles, former Waldorf teacher, and is now he's very much doing his own thing. And I was actually just with Alex Eck, just interviewed him at my friend Jared Picard's event around
Oh,
the
wonderful.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
I
I was with
connected with Edmund a little bit around,
you did.
yeah, around the Holy Nights, the Sacred Nights, and had some conversations with him. He's a really deep and beautiful man. Yeah.
Yes, and hilarious. I mean, which was one of the great treats of this men's group, which I've spoken about before, that I said yes to at the start of last year, that he and my now friend Jared Picard put on together as host and teacher, and I've had some great friendships come out of that. And I would say the two pillars to that I've described to people were, number one, we had this roster of visiting masters beyond Edmund and Jared. We had our first visiting master was Paul Check, who did a 2 hour presentation for us on the dream line and what it means to walk your dream line. And I mean, I'll never forget one of the many pearls of wisdom that we took out of that treasure chest was Paul saying, if you see someone else's footprints on your path, you need a different path. And
Hmm.
that dovetails with something I heard recently from an Irish poet, something to the effect of you'll know that you're on your path because it disappears before you. And you spoke
Mm.
about the unknown. There have been times where that uncertainty is quite daunting and frightening, to be honest. I mean, I'm speaking from my own personal, like that's what it's like looking at human potential, is what could I be? And part of our conditioning does make us answer, our smallest voice is often what pipes up and thinks of all the things that I could not be, or allegedly am not, instead of
Mhm.
I could be anything. I mean, that is the mystery in the magic of potentially infinite possibilities. And I am one to say that it's easy to be overwhelmed by that. But to bring this full circle as well, so having access to someone like Paul was, for a 2 hour live presentation, people like Eben Britton and Laird Hamilton and Cal Callahan and Jason Picard and people who I was familiar with to some degree, but then to share our virtual space with them was very special. That was one pillar. The other pillar was the teachings of self-mastery from Steiner. And I had taken the leap to read some Steiner books and had done my best with that. And thankfully, Edmund assuaged all of our concerns when he said, it's not reading Steiner is not about your ability to be scholarly about it and have the perfect interpretation of exactly what he's saying. It's very much, if there is ambiguity, it's for you to sit with that, let it ferment, let it boil over until it shows back up in your life. And I mean, I could wax poetic about the many uh subterranean levels that were amazing revelations that I unearthed in that time and since. But one of the things, when we were staying in touch with Edmund at the end of last year, and he was sharing with us some resources around Steiner's version of the Holy Nights, which I'm looking forward to speaking about with you because I know you've done your due diligence on that. And you can correct me if I have this wrong, but something Edmund had shared was that at times of the year when our physical energy is the most abundant, our spiritual energy has sort of a recuperating time. And that was what I found last summer when I was coaching tennis outside, and I had just this tremendous surge in physical energy where in a good way I would go to bed tired and sleep like a baby rock. And I was not as active or feeling the potency of my spiritual practices. I still had them. I still had these walking meditations that we learned from Steiner in that men's group as well. And I had these staples in my routine, But right when I was second guessing that was when Edmund shared with us that teaching, that this is the time where you exert. This is the time where you perform in a healthy way, and the spiritual energy is latent. And then the inverse happens through the darker and quieter times of the year. And that has given me great comfort, knowing that as I do less, then I can have more of the internal activity, energy, and really feel that. And I've felt that lately, just as some things are quieting down, and I definitely feel these other surges percolating to the surface. I'm if I had a question there, I'm curious if you're familiar with that teaching and how it takes shape in your life. And also, I mean, we can start to dive into, I think one thing I was especially curious about, Laura, because I'm very committed to understanding as much of language as possible. Why the change from holy to sacred?
Mm.
I have my own thoughts and my own assumptions. I'd love to hear from you. Yeah, just your relationship to that inverse of when the physicality is so potent and maybe the spirituality, is maybe not as obvious to us, and then how that starts to those tables start to turn as the seasons change, and what your own experience has been like with that.
Yeah, I think that's really what we've been speaking to throughout this conversation. But yeah, if we pay attention to what nature's doing, right, and in the peak of winter, the trees have dropped their leaves. There are no external blossoms, right? There's this feeling of everything drawing inward. We're conserving energy in the external, and that allows us to draw inward into the internal realm of connection with source and spirit, right? That happens internally. And
And they
so
don't die, right? Like it's not like trees and
no,
plants
they're not
die.
dead. They have drawn the energy inward. They are no longer expressing in the external. They are now just more internally focused. And as a 47-year-old woman, that's something that I've been thinking about even with my own longer cycle, right? And moving into the perimenopause years, and it's like that external energy is no longer going to be so focused outward, right? And they say that as a woman comes into her crone years, that the spiritual potential is much more enhanced. Our intuition is much more enhanced because our body is not focused on the external biology of producing babies and
Yeah.
and life. And so that internal spiritual resonance amplifies, right? And it's like everything else. We see everything in the macro and in the micro. It's this fractal universe, right, where you can see these patterns playing out in so many different ways. As far as the difference or the choice to move to sacred over
Yes.
holy, that was something that my publishers suggested. And initially, I will say that it wasn't that I was opposed to it, but it just felt odd to me because I've been calling this practice the Holy Nights for 16 years now. And so it's kind of
Yeah.
like renaming your old dog. Like it just feels strange, like I'm supposed to call
Yeah.
it what now? It's the Holy Nights. But I did completely understand and am on board with their reasoning, which is that many people associate the word holy with the Holy Bible, the Holy Child, and Oh Holy Nights, the Christmas song. And so
Yes.
there are people from other denominations who would never even take a second glance at this box, sitting on the shelf. If it said 13 Holy Nights, they'd say, oh, that's a Christmas thing, that's a Christian thing, not
Yeah. Yeah.
interested, and just pass it right on by. And
That's too bad. Yeah, but
yeah,
it's a
and
good reality check that is
yeah,
the Christian monopoly does have an
well,
impact.
and I did look up the definitions of the words holy and sacred in
Sure.
the dictionary, and they literally mean exactly the same thing pertaining to God or religion
Yes.
is what the definition is for holy and sacred. However, culturally, the word sacred we associate with a much broader spectrum of belief systems.
Mhm.
And so that's why the publishers decided to go that way. And it took me a moment to get used to, but then once I did, I was like, you know what, they're right, because my intention is to cast the widest net possible. And this practice isn't just for Christians, even though it really, the inspiration for it trickled down through Steiner to my teacher to me. And of course, Steiner was a mystical Christian, or man, I'm not sure what the right title is for him, but
I know. Yeah.
and,
Yeah. I
and
generally
predecessor.
describe
Yeah,
if I do talk about his religious belief, I usually say Christian mystic or something like
Christian
that.
mystic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in a ways, it is associated with Christianity, but not the form of Christianity that most people think of when we say Christianity. It is just a completely different camp and exploration and belief system. What Steiner represents, it's not anything at all what people associate with Christianity these days. So much more, nature based, and all the schools of mystery schools throughout the ages, and so that is where the title swap came from.
And I had an assumption that the words were fairly commensurate with their meaning, and still, one thing that I've been wrestling with lately is, and this came up in a book. I don't know if you're familiar with Stephen Jenkinson, who used to write
Yes.
a lot about death, but this
Yep.
book has been superb lately. I don't know if you're familiar with his work on matrimony.
Is
And
that
this,
one that he wrote with Kimberly Johnson?
yes,
Kimberly Ann
indeed.
Johnson? Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Did you read it? Do you have any? You can spoil some thoughts for me on it. I'd love to
I
hear it if you have
I have
thoughts.
not read it.
Okay.
I've read parts of it. I not enough to comment right now, and it's not fresh
Okay.
in my mind. It was a while ago, but Kimberly is a friend of mine,
Oh,
from
wonderful. Okay.
not a close friend, but I do, a friend from Boulder back in the day when I lived in Colorado.
There are many different seasons and shades of friends, so
Yeah.
still a good one to have to count among your friends. And the reason it came to mind is I think he does a really, I mean, it's been quite a stirring job for me of distinguishing between sacred and profane. And I think
Hmm.
when a lot of us think of profane, we might think of profanity, offensive language, or something that is sacrilegious as another synonym for that. And yet, it really, at a in a very neutral way, my understanding is that profane just means that which is fairly run of the mill, day to day, maybe lacking any significant meaning. And in this new age spiritual community that some of us are privy to, there's almost an obsession with bringing sacred language and sacred attention and intention to infuse every single thing that we do. And one of Stephen's uh, ideas that he was putting forth, especially in this book around matrimony and the sacred rites, the sacred ritual of matrimony, marriage,
Hmm.
wedding, welding people together in a sacred union, all
Hmm.
words that people have almost entirely abandoned when you think of a wedding ceremony. But he said that we are intended in our cultural history to have these rites that are so far removed from our day to day that they become massively profound and impactful for us, that they are supposed to stand alone because they are closer to God than anything else that we do. And to think that we can do that every day is to muddy the waters. And still, I have rituals that have my sacred attention, to do my walking meditations that I learned from Steiner, or I did 100-day qigong practice that I'm very proud that I don't know if I've done anything other than be alive for 100 days in a row. So I was very glad to do that. And so I'd love your reflection on that, finding that balance where we probably do need a sprinkle of sacred practices throughout our days, and then where do we turn our attention to these sacred moments, because we don't get married every year.
Right.
um Death is, Stephen Jenkinson is most known for his authorship on death, and the ritual that is supposed to be, which we definitely do not have anymore. Talk about conditioning for that. I mean, I don't, no one ever taught me, despite growing up Catholic, about what it means to mourn, what it means to grieve, what it means to celebrate someone's life and them taking another journey. So um yeah, I just love your reflections on what this means to you, to go from, yes, we have mundane and profane, maybe we sprinkle in some sacred practice throughout our days, and then what are the opportunities beyond 13 nights of the year to truly embrace a sacred rite of significance for marking a new passage of time, a new cycle.
Yeah. I can play devil's advocate on both sides of
Please,
that
please feel
conversation.
free. Please feel free.
Yeah, one of my favorite teachers is Adyashanti. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his
I'm
work or
not.
teachings. His books are all absolutely gorgeous.
Oh, cool.
But I just love the way he speaks about things. And he relates a story in one of his books about when he experienced his first sort of jolt of enlightenment, and it was a mystical moment for him. And he was, kind of walking around in this new state of consciousness, awareness, elevated consciousness, recognizing that there wasn't anything that wasn't sacred. Like he was looking for something, like he was trying to find something that wasn't sacred. And he actually went into the bathroom to look at the toilet and was like, no, even the toilet is sacred. So, it reminds
There's
me.
water in there. I mean, there's your there's your
Yeah.
answer to that.
Holy water. It reminds me of this idea that that you can't not have a spiritual experience here on earth because you are a spiritual being. And so it's that irony and that cosmic joke of we go around seeking spiritual experiences when there isn't anything other than a spiritual experience to have here, because you are a being of spirit,
Yeah.
and so I could take that sort of perspective on things. And yet we get so buried in the mundane that we forget that it's sacred. We forget, right, that every single moment here is divine. And so that's what ritual is for, is to wake us up and remind us that 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 life is sacred, right? And that we are divine beings, and that we are connected into source. And that's where practices like the sacred nights, or your 100 days of qigong, or whatever it is, are incredibly important and powerful. And it's also why I've been researching in this last 9 months all of our holidays and their history and where they came from. And, originally in the last 5 years, I've just sort of considered myself the Christmas gal, because I've, of course, been so deep in the sacred nights and this
Yeah.
time of year that corresponds to our Christmas. And so I really dove deep into, especially for the new edition of the Oracle deck, there's a history of the winter solstice chapter. And,
Oh,
and when my publishers actually asked me to write a history chapter, they said, we're curious. People would be
yeah.
curious, what's the history of this practice? And so I recognized at that time, a couple of years ago, that I've been doing this practice at that time for 14 or 15 years, but I didn't really know where it came from, other than kind of Steiner, and my teacher taught it to me, and I fell in love with it, but I hadn't researched the history. So I dove into that and uncovered a lot of stuff about our midwinter holidays and festivals throughout the ages, and have been speaking about that history, which is actually quite surprising, on various podcasts and writing articles and whatnot. And as I've been doing that, people have asked, well, what about Halloween? Or what do you know about Valentine's Day, or, Easter? And I sort of go, oh no, I don't know about the other holidays. I'm the Christmas girl, and so I finally one day thought, what are you doing? These people are asking they want you to be this expert. Why don't you step into that role? And so this year, actually, I read a total of 31 books on the history of our holidays and paganism and the backstory to all the different holidays. And it is fascinating. The point that I'm trying to come around to here is that people in power and elites have long known that ritual and these sacred moments of pause throughout the year are incredibly powerful. And they are opportunities not only to recognize what it is that we hold most dear and most sacred, but they are also moments where we are actually programming the future generations. We are informing them. We're shaping culture. So I often say that rituals are not only mirrors, they're also molds, right?
Hmm.
And the reason for that is that when we all collectively pause and give our attention to something, and say, this is what's most important, this is what's most holy, this is what's most sacred, we're all in agreement about that, right? And the interesting thing about researching the history of our holidays is that you recognize that these sacred and holy days have been utilized over the ages to mold and to shape and to guide the masses. And knowing this, knowing that there's multi layers, historical tangled stories to each of these holidays, not a single one of them is what we think it is. You know, there are surprises in every single history of like where they came from and how we ended up where we are today. And it's not ever just a gradual unfolding of of one these ancient cultures slowly passing on their traditions. It's not that at all. There have been very clear moments in history where these sacred days were intentionally shifted, changed, altered, right, in order to again uh, change the behavior of the masses. And so if we know that, wouldn't it behoove us to take a look at what we've got, how we're doing it now, regardless of where it came from, right? Like, okay, there's this tangled history. It's been intentionally manipulated over the ages. And okay, there's that. So because we know that, how do we want to celebrate these sacred days? And what do we hold most dear? Is it commercialism? Is it shopping? Because that's where we're at, And so what do we want to teach our children, and what do we want to remind ourselves of? What is most important to us? What's most important to us right now, and what's most important to us moving forward? I think I think we are overdue for what I call a complete holiday rebranding, or a returning of the holy to our holidays.
Well said. And I can say from my childhood and even these last several years owning our home, and we've become the Thanksgiving house. And because that, I mean, I may have told the story on this podcast before, but my mom has told any and everyone who will listen for many years that from the time I was a little boy, I would say, "Mommy, I'm always, my wife and I are always going to spend Thanksgiving with you," and
Oh,
because we were the Thanksgiving house growing up, Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Half of
yeah,
our home was built in 1693. Certainly had that colonial feel all the while, and still, I mean, our biggest groups were probably 30 plus people, and I, interestingly enough, always found myself in the kitchen with the women. And then when I finally got my astrological chart read to me, it turns out I work very well with women, so that aligns with my growing up experience. And but that always held a special place for me, Laura, because of the, I would say, the wholesomeness. It was, I mean, we pretty much never had football on. Yes, there's
Mhm.
drinking, but the food was always of the highest quality as best we could. People were, fairly excited and happy to be together celebrating. I wasn't privy to any, if there was any family drama. I'm sure there's stuff like that. Now that I have to set the guest list, I can appreciate, seating charts and all that. It's like planning a wedding at times. But of course, I mean, I doubt we know. I'm pretty sure we don't know the whole story of Thanksgiving history, and of course, that's a much newer historical milestone for us in the nation of America. And still, it's been so fascinating for me to listen to you speak about Christmas and All Hallows Eve and things that I knew had more depth to their stories. I'm wondering if you'll indulge me, maybe go through each season, because Easter certainly has its significance to the whole world, or at least it
Yeah.
could, or it should. I was born April 21. I've had many Easters on or around my birthday. I was named Thomas because of the story of Jesus's resurrection, and there was
Mm,
Didymus, doubting Thomas, who did not believe that Christ had risen and needed to see the
mm.
marks in his hands and his feet that he was crucified. And I have to say, for my own personal hero's journey, it's only been these last several years that I've really stepped into my own etymological history of that name. I wasn't always skeptical. I wasn't always curious about why things are the way that they are. And the last several years have absolutely ratcheted that up within me to question as much as I possibly can, as well as, why do I hold certain things in my life dearer than others? Why is Thanksgiving so important to me? What do I take for granted that I have been led to believe is important? I remember someone asked me about education one time, and I said, "Oh, if I had kids, I'd probably send them to Catholic school." And Jordan almost snapped her neck with a whiplash. And afterward, and this is where, as relationships are so great, she checked me on that. She said, "Why would you say that? Like, I don't even think you believe that." And I just realized that that's the party line that I grew up with. I went to Catholic
Right.
school, and I, this is 2 years ago, but I know about Waldorf education and Montessori and homeschooling. I was homeschooled till I was in the third grade, so I absolutely had the merits of that. And this is part of my path of just how often can I turn my inner vision within to assess what what is it, what are these false idols that I have that are probably worth taking down, because we all have idols, be they false or real to us. And some of them are around holidays or beliefs about what, this is what we do at this time of the year, for this particular holiday. And I'm with you. I mean, it is absolutely our calling to rebrand, to recreate, to revitalize what these times of the year mean to us. I'd love to hear about Easter, and if you know anything about May Day, because
Mm.
or anything else in springtime, because the more I've learned about astrology, or also just the more natural cycles of the year, I look forward to the time of Aries. I look forward to the last quarter of March, to really mark, okay, this is when life starts to really return in full force. And so I sort of plan my New Year's celebrations around that. And I can see, I think Steiner may have had alternative perspectives on that if you're in the darkness of the womb, of course there is life already budding within that. So we can go back and forth on when these timelines really begin or end. I think everything is transient, but let's start with spring, if you please, and you can pick Easter or throw a curveball for Valentine's. Anything that has really piqued your curiosity in your research about something that we celebrate as it is, and where there might be more fruitful opportunity to take a deeper stock of how we can
Yeah.
recognize the cycle.
Okay. First, I'm going to rewind to your original
Please.
holiday, which was Thanksgiving,
Mm-hmm.
just because that's such a big imprint for you, and you're the Thanksgiving house, and you're the Thanksgiving guy. I will say, I think that Thanksgiving is the least obnoxiously commercialized of all of our major American holidays. It
Fair.
tends to really focus on just,
Oh,
you know,
can I tell you
yeah,
one just snapshot into my world lately? And because I haven't had the opportunity to rant and rave about this yet, several weeks ago, I started seeing people put up really scary
yeah,
Halloween decorations,
yeah,
and I don't get it. I mean, I've never been a horror movie guy.
yeah.
I got scared once
But
really really well at
we will
Halloween.
totally go there. I want to
Okay,
talk
all
about
right, cool,
Halloween. Yeah,
cool.
but
But yeah, but I
let's
but I agree. It's sort of Thanksgiving then.
yeah, let's check off Thanksgiving first, just because that was
Okay,
the
yeah,
first holiday you brought up. And so again, I just want to emphasize that each one of these holidays has its own tangled history with twists and turns, and places where there's been overlays from those in power wanting to shift the behavior of the masses, right? And so, and I start with Thanksgiving because it's a fairly simple one, and I don't think we're too far off the mark with how we celebrate. It's a supposedly homemade meal, although that's not always the case. But family and people even are somewhat aware that this is a day for giving thanks. It's in the
yeah,
title of the
gratitude.
holiday.
Yes,
A lot of times, people at their family dinners will talk about, okay, what are we grateful for? So that I
yeah,
think some of the more worthy themes are still lingering and still accessible with Thanksgiving. We could lean into it a little bit more. We could lean into the themes of gratitude, and really every family instead of just some
abundance,
could.
the cornucopia, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. The harvest time, the abundance, that gratitude for family and loved ones, and all of that. And some of us have lost that. For some people, it's a chore, and like you said, the family politics and the underlying, disgruntled
Yeah,
family riffs are all just being held in tension. Whatever. So it's not perfect, and but Thanksgiving actually was originally, days of giving thanks was a Puritan ideal and a
mhm,
Puritan thing, and it wasn't. And these days of giving thanks were not held at any particular time of the year. They were held in response to current events. So if something happened and there was a reason to give thanks, they would have a day of Thanksgiving, and it was a day of Thanksgiving to God. And so these were very religious. It was a
oh
Puritan.
yes,
It was a Puritan ritual. And so there was one woman, Sarah Josepha Hale, who was an editor for a popular magazine, and she just was passionate about there being a national day of Thanksgiving. for for worship reasons, right? And so she petitioned all the governors, and she petitioned 6 different presidents, the last one being Lincoln. And the reason that we have an established day of Thanksgiving is because it was during the Civil War. And it seemed like a good idea to bring a national day of thanks on board in order to create a sense of unity and to hopefully, smooth over tensions between the North and the South, the Union and the Confederacy. So it was really a political move on Lincoln's part to try to bring some feel good unity to this time when there was division and strife and war. And then the whole pageant that's played out in schools has it's not related to actual historical facts at all. The buckles on the pilgrims' hats and the single feather, and there's this iconic imagery that we take for granted as being somehow rooted in actual historical events, and it's just not. There was one paragraph, and it actually is one single very long run-on sentence by Edward Winslow, and I think it was 1621 maybe, that it was written, and it didn't surface until many years later. And he describes this this Thanksgiving meal, which it just there's a reference to natives being there, but we don't know if they just showed up, if there's tension, if there's not tension, if they were invited. Like, we have this whole little pageant that we play out where the Indians helped the settlers and everybody's all friends, and it's just not historically accurate. And that whole it's apocryphal, tale has been extracted from this one run-on sentence by Edward Winslow. And now, we play it out over and over again. And it was really pushed in the schools. It was intentionally pushed in the schools, again, in order to download that imprint and to create this feel-good sense of national pride in the upcoming generations, right? So that's just one example of how those in political power used a ritual, a sacred event, a holiday to shape the behavior that they were desiring in the masses. So that's Thanksgiving. That said, like I started out with, I think it's the holiday where it's the closest to. It's not too hard to just shift gently your perspective and have a really beautiful day of actually giving thanks and thinking about gratitude and being grateful for our loved ones and our family and the abundance that we just so easily don't even recognize is all around us all the time. And so that's Thanksgiving. Any questions on that one?
No, I appreciate the historical perspective on all that, because it's a terrific snapshot of mountain out of a molehill. One morsel of information or historical record turns into a myth. And our mutual associate, I refer to Paul as my mentor from afar. The only other Oracle deck that I own is this one, the Oracle of Mythic Heroes, and I have always, from the time I was young, have been organically obsessed with myth and story and hero's journey and
powerful.
all of that.
Yeah,
very, very much so. And only
very
now
powerful.
do I have, thanks to the work of Paul Check or I should say Joseph Campbell, but Paul Check was someone who introduced me to Joseph Campbell, have come to cherish the import of having a mythic view of our life. And it doesn't mean delusional, and it doesn't mean fictional either. I think the quote from, it's either
something
Jung
in between,
very much so. I forget if it's Carl Jung or Joseph Campbell who said, a myth is a story that never happened and is happening all the time.
Yeah,
and
I love that.
It's the great paradox of it. So, but now part of my own self-education around, Lara, we absolutely need a better moniker other than conspiracy theory, because as the joke goes, what's the difference between a conspiracy theory and the truth? About 6 months. So we definitely need a different moniker for that. What that has led me to investigate are the myths, especially national myths that we have, whether it's Civil War, whether it's colonial founding, whether it's Revolutionary War, World War II, whatever it is, they are myths that then become heavily
Yes.
programmed with
Yes.
what you
Listen,
grew up
I
with in
have
school.
arrived at a place in my life where and it's perhaps a trite overused phrase, but the only thing I know is that I don't know anything. It's like I have no clue what legitimate, what true history is.
I,
And
I
here
have
I
a
am diving into the history of each of these holidays, which even the available history, if you do some digging, is surprising. But even underneath that, it's like I'm still reading it out of a book. Where did that come from?
yeah,
And
yeah.
maybe it's not the most widely available myth, or but anyway, that's just to say that take everything with a grain of salt. This is some
I have
stuff that I've unearthed and uncovered, but who knows what the actual pure and truth, pure and whatever.
I have a book over my
Actual
shoulder,
history.
Laura, that says that the title of this book is "Nothing is true, everything is a lie."
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
That's how I feel. And maybe there's multiple truths. I mean, I
of
don't even
course there
know
are.
this reality, this realm. Maybe there's how many of us are on the planet now? Close to 9 billion. Maybe there's nine
Even
billion. Maybe there's nine
even that,
billion
Laura.
truths.
Even I don't buy that for any amount of money. I just think because if you take a place like India, where they say in a place like
Yeah.
Mumbai, there's several million people, and then in that massive country of India, they say there's 2 billion people in the country of India, and
Mm.
if millions upon millions of them are just in the cities, it's like there aren't hundreds of millions of people populating the countryside of India. I'm sorry, I don't
Okay,
wrap my
so
head around that.
so we agree that we know nothing. Got
Yes,
it. We're
we
on
we
board.
agree we
We're
agree
on
there.
board with everything's a
Yeah.
lie and we know nothing.
All right, here's a
So
softball for you. How about Halloween? If you're ready to go
Halloween.
there. Okay.
Yeah, so Halloween is basically rooted in Celtic traditions, and specifically the Samhain or Samhain. It's pronounced slightly differently in different dialects, but that is it was a time when the veil was said to be at its thinnest. Again, think about these pagan cultures. They are tuning into nature. Well, what's happening during the fall? Everything's decaying, rotting, dying in a sense, right? So it's a
Mhm.
really natural time for humans to look around them and start thinking about the cycle of life and death, and specifically death. And so the Samhain ritual was a time when the veil was said to be at its thinnest between our world and the realm of spirit, and ancestral spirits and those who had already passed on were said to intermingle in our earthly experience. They were present, they were with us. And so traditions of guising, dressing up in costume, and mischief, tricks and tomfoolery, were
Indeed.
were things that were happening during that time in that festival. And so the Roman Catholic Church then came in, and they always attempted to rebrand the pagan holidays and give them, Christian meaning and overlay. And so they established All Saints Day, which was November 1st, a day to celebrate all the saints who had passed. And then this November 2nd would be All Souls Day, which was a day to celebrate all souls who had passed over. And then the night before, October 31st, became All Hallows Eve, All Hallows Evening, right? And so that's where the date of our Halloween comes into play. So again, so these practices are brought over to the New World and America, and what we saw a lot of was the mischief and the tricks, and especially within the youth, this rowdiness, and again, originally this mischief was would have been people attempting to fool the spirits, or not be fooled by the spirits, or maybe it was opportunistic youths playing tricks and blaming it on spirits. But these were all parts of the tradition, right? And so in America, you have a lot of this mischief and rowdiness happening, which was not acceptable to the elites and the ruling classes and the Puritans. And so what happened with Halloween was very similar to what happened with Christmas, where they domesticated the holiday by turning it towards, family and this very moral, very pious holiday, and making it about the children, and these cute little children dressed in costumes. And then, we give them treats and sweets, and then the commercial aspect is overlaid. And it was this attempt to domesticate the older um, versions of, these pagan traditions that were still bubbling up through the overlay of Christianity. So it's like Christianity couldn't quite. It's very hard to get rid of these pagan tendencies to want to celebrate in certain ways. And so it was really ultimately the commercialism and the shifting towards domesticity that finally quote unquote tamed some of these holidays. So that's sort of where Halloween came from. There's one story that I loved that was about Jack O'Lantern, and that was actually one of these wandering souls and spirits that was more present during the Samhain period or time. And Jack of the Lantern was also called Stingy Jack. He was not a good soul. He was a bad dude, and he was very tricksy. And he had tricked the devil. This was myth, of course, right? Mm-hmm. He had tricked the devil into promising that he would never take him to hell. And so when Jack died, he didn't go to hell, but he also wasn't good enough to get into heaven. So he had to roam the earth for the rest of eternity. And the devil, almost to sort of spite him or to laugh at him, kicked him a fiery coal from hell that was an eternal burning ember. And in Ireland, they had not pumpkins, but they had lots of turnips. And so they would carve out turnips during that time and place a coal or a candle in there. And that was where, then that tradition came over to the States, and we had pumpkins, and wow, that was much cooler than a turnip. And so we had jack-o'-lanterns, and that's where that originated in that myth of Stingy Jack and Jack of the Lantern. But again, going back to, the veil between the realms being at its thinnest. Now, fast forward today to all the gore and the guts and the awful imagery that we are bombarding ourselves and our children with during this holiday. And I 100% agree with you. It is a very twisted and unhealthy version of acknowledging this theme of death. If I were to rewrite the way that we celebrate Halloween, I would look more towards Samhain or the way that they do it in Mexico, the Day of the Dead, right? And cultures all over the world. Again, if you think, pagan cultures immersed in nature, they came up with very similar traditions all over the place because they were looking at nature, what's happening, decay, death, right? And so this time of year, this is what is sacred. This is what we lean into. This is the part of the cycle that's right in front of our face. And so, what my daughter and I did over the years was we would, inspired by the Day of the Dead and Mexico, we would make an altar to our dead people during Halloween. We also did costumes, and we did other things. We did all the fun things, but we did also make an altar to our dead people. I'd get pictures out of all of the ancestors that I had pictures of, and we would put their favorite food items or my grandfather's harmonica in front of his picture. And, and it was such a neat thing to do because one, it makes this topic of death not taboo and not scary, which the gore and the blood and the guts is not helping with, right? That's just making it scarier. And in a really twisted way. And then also it was neat because it was an opportunity for me to talk about some of these ancestors that she didn't know anything about. And there was this moment of sharing her history, her ancestral history with her. So that's what I would lean into during Halloween. And I think I love the creative element of the costumes and everything else, but I think it's an opportunity for us to demystify or take the terror out of the conversation of death with our children, not to make it more terrifying, right? So those are sort of my thoughts on Halloween.
So a penny for your thoughts as well on why you think the overt disconnection from that other realm of death and darkness, do you think it's because that's where the black magicians are in their playground like that, because they are so, and we do have the death cults out there, and we do have people who are tuned into more of the versions of magic that are darker, that count on energy, soul harvesting. I mean, I don't mean to make it too dark, but these are the realities. Are we've always had black magicians. Some of them actually are in positions of relative influence and control. It's not real power, it's control. It's something else entirely. But yeah, do you see it as more? Is it just because we do not have? And this is my whole thing about America, Laura, is that I don't know if we have a culture
Mhm.
that is distinct aside from, people can say freedom and independence, but because we're so young, because 250
Consumerism.
years, yeah, very,
That's
very
a
much
culture of
so.
consumerism.
It's
Yeah.
it's true. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it's true. And also, since we've inherited, whether it's Anglo-Saxon, Christian, European, whatever you want to call it, maybe, I mean, we really don't have any. I don't think we have any carryover from Native American culture, or Indian culture, because even they came from other
Yeah.
parts of the world. So we are making it up as we go along. And even though, yes, we do have some Puritan influences from pilgrim travelers and colonial settlers, of course, that became dominated by English Empire, Church of England, and all that. So we absolutely have a canvas on which to create new culture, new cultural rituals. But I'm curious just why you think there is this theme of distancing us from, you know, the fertile ground of darkness, of death, of something beyond the veil of our current reality. At times of the year when we could be tapping into that. I have a note here to talk about May Day because I was doing a little bit of homework on Walpurgis Night, and I'll tell you how that came into my awareness. But yeah, what's your educated guess on how we came to have this place? And to say a final word for the inversion, like you were alluding to, that
Yeah.
while we don't want people to explore their relationship with the spirituality of death and a soul taking a different journey beyond the veil that we can see, now we have the very physical horror, terror of gore, violence, blood, guts, murder,
Yeah.
all of that seems like an
The
inversion
satanic.
to me. Very much
It's,
so. Very much
yeah.
so.
Well, first I want to say, because you mentioned we have this opportunity to this blank slate, so to speak, to create our holidays, and I think the problem is that we do so unconsciously,
Mhm.
rather than consciously. We're completely unaware of that opportunity, or that it even is an opportunity, or that we have any choice in how we celebrate these holidays. We kind of just go along with whatever is fed to us, right? And that's a big part of the problem, and that's why we are susceptible to the programming from whoever they are, right? Whoever's programming us for whatever their agenda is. And that's probably not a simple um, equation. But and that's why I am excited to share all this history with folks, because it's like, hey, look at how twisted this journey as to where we got where we are. It's not this benevolent thing that we think it is. And let's take this back. Let's take our holidays back. Let's take our sacred moments back, and let's do so consciously and decide what we want to honor, what we want to celebrate, what's most sacred. As far as you know um, uh, the whole topic of death being taboo, either completely taboo or totally dark and satanic, right? Like there's no middle
Yeah.
ground. I think it's just a way of disconnecting us from our souls and our true power as spiritual beings, and magnificent, powerful, very powerful, divinely creative spiritual beings. And if you can disconnect us from the cycle of life and death, if you can make us terrified of death, if you can completely disconnect us from any understanding that we are eternal, divinely creative beings, if you can put our focus on this completely superficial physical realm of consumerism and wanting to you know look 29 for your entire life and
Yeah.
inject yourself with a bunch of poisons, and cut yourself up with surgeries, and
Yeah, when you were when
like,
you were talking about the crone years, that's what I thought of, Laura, is, I think there is a burgeoning conversation about women, you aging, such as it is our very real experience. I think there are more organic ways that you can not keep it at bay, but as we say, age gracefully. And I think a lot of that has to do with if you can reduce your inputs and, maybe manage your outputs a little bit better. But yeah,
Or just
there's
reduce the toxicity, right? I mean,
for
my
sure.
problem with the whole, beauty industry and the forever young industry is
Mm,
that, because I posted something at one point about basically feeling sad that women were injecting these poisons into their
yeah.
faces and, and cutting them, so whatever, surgeries and all the things. And I got a little blowback from, it was really just one woman. And, you're
Yeah.
always going to get that
You
online. So
you mean
I,
you expressed an opinion and someone didn't agree with it?
I'm
How
not
dare you?
saying
How dare
that
you?
this is the majority of folks, but this one woman was very defensive and very offended, and she was like, I just like to look and feel my best, and there's nothing wrong with that, and and my response was, of course, there's nothing wrong with beautifying yourself, with looking and feeling your best, but when it's done in a way where you're actually causing self harm. And you
Yes.
are, in fact, the truth is that you are lowering your vitality in order
That's right.
to create a false appearance of more vitality. That makes me sad. You're causing self harm. You are dimming your light. You're lowering your vitality. You're hurting your physical organism in order to create a false appearance of more vitality. It's a lie. That just makes me sad.
Yeah.
That doesn't sit right with me. you know and that's my issue with the whole beauty industry. There's nothing wrong with adorning yourself, with feeling good, with celebrating the divine feminine and beauty. That's a wonderful thing, but when it's done in a way that is truthfully self-harming, full stop.
For sure. And yeah, so
Yeah.
so to consolidate that concept, I mean, when you were bringing up the crone years, I don't think you're quite there, but to go from maiden to matron and mother and then into crone, that is a natural life cycle. To reject that or deny that,
Hmm.
uh, absolutely comes with a cost, because it usually requires some level of this. Absolutely pertains to the larger conversation around holistic health, which is that anything you do to stifle what is natural within the body, if it's an expression of disease, if it's an expression of age, something that really should
Hmm.
and must happen, anything you do to stifle that goes down within the deeper layers of you, both on a on the physical level. It goes deeper into your tissues and then into your organs and your blood, and you can get certainly more compromising diseases from
Hmm.
that. And I
Hmm.
mean, the irony of this all is the cliche that inner beauty is what matters, because to have beauty and vitality within you will manifest. I mean, that was my encounter, meeting you, was, there's someone who has a vital light, because she's not
Hmm.
doing anything to really suppress that. And of course, that was very much on display throughout the lands of Sovereignty Ranch in Bandera,
Hmm.
Texas. So
Yeah.
I'm fortunate to be connected to those kinds of people, and I would wish that on anyone. I tell people, to recognize their beauty as best you can, and just reflect it. Be a mirror to them in how we operate as well. Not
Hmm.
And so if we can, start to build a bridge to other times of the year, I think our finale will be into the holy nights. But what about
Yeah.
summer? Because we have the bloody 4th of July. Laura,
Right.
is all we
I
have.
know. I dove into that one a tiny bit. I mean, that one's just pretty superficial. This is obviously a
Yeah,
holiday that's being created by the government to bolster national pride, and
sure. And
support of the
and and
government,
and
support of and obedience to
I was gonna say, the
authority.
the fucking hilarity of that is that those patriots, those founding fathers, whoever they were, whatever myths we believe about those men,
Yeah.
the reality was that just for what they were doing, even if they weren't actually on the front lines of Virginia or Massachusetts or any place like that, just by saying we will not be ruled, we will not be governed by a nation, they were all liable to have them and their families killed. And now these days, most of us, and I do mean us, I'm not othering other people, most of us don't say shit when it comes to real injustice, when it comes to real
Yeah.
infringement upon people's natural liberties, what it means to be a soul, what it means to have a spiritual experience on this earth, to be muzzled, to be jailed, to be censored, anything like that. Most people are celebrating the government's
Right.
concession that we've given them to do that.
Right, right. Yeah,
Uh,
that's a whole rabbit hole, the
sure
politics.
is.
And like I said, I really took a superficial dive on that one because I felt like
Yeah, because it is.
it was pretty clear.
Yeah.
What have we left out? We've got
About
we did Thanksgiving.
springtime.
Yeah, springtime. So I'm gonna lump well, so springtime, there's Easter, which is what most
Yeah.
people think. There's often this multi-layer. There's like the pagan traditions, and then the Christian overlay, which was really an attempt by Rome to consolidate all of these varying pagan beliefs under one umbrella and to centralize power and to centralize a belief system that they could then control more effectively. If there was one belief system, then they would more effectively be able to, control and guide and manipulate the masses. Um, so we have all of these springtime fertility festivals,
Yeah.
really, which were often very sexual in nature. There were rituals where you would, through a lottery system, get paired up with a sexual partner for a certain period of time. There were lots of rituals that involved blood because of the blood of the womb, and
Hmm.
sacrificing of animals sometimes. But very often it was the fertility and the promiscuity and the sex rites and rituals. And of course, that was not chaste enough for the rising Christianity, and so that's kind of the brief. So we have the Christian overlay. We've got the original pagan fertility festivals. There were multiple different versions of that throughout history and across cultures. You have the word Easter itself probably came from the Germanic goddess of spring, Yoster, spelled Eostre. But there are many versions of her throughout different cultures. She was the goddess of spring and fertility and renewal and birth and all of this, right? So then you have the Christian overlay, and then you have some of these symbols of fertility that sort of trickle down and are still with us in our Easter celebrations today. The egg, which they then rebranded to represent the tomb of Christ's resurrection. So they sort of took all of these symbols as best they could and kind of repurposed them to have some Christian overlay or meaning. And then there's always the third layer of wanting to domesticate the holiday, because we still have some of this old pagan energy bubbling up through the layer of Christianity. It didn't quite stamp it out. So now we're going to overlay our Victorian ideals and bring it into this domestic, family-friendly version. And then the fourth layer would be the commercial layer that gets added, on top. So you've got paganism, Christianity, the Victorian domesticity of making it child-friendly, family-friendly, bringing the attention inside the walls of the family unit to keep any mixing and mingling with the ruckus, rowdy masses from happening. And then the commercialism that just deadens the whole thing for a whole other layer of sucking the original meaning and life out of the sacred moment or sacred day. So that's sort of Easter. I actually thought that Valentine's Day was even more interesting. There's the original, not the original myth, but the overlaid myth was that there was this Saint Valentine, and there are all these apocryphal myths and stories that he was. Some of them say that he was a priest who was willing to marry couples when there was an emperor who had declared marriage illegal because he needed more single men to go to war. And so supposedly this Saint Valentine was in, clandestine situations, marrying couples, and then he got thrown in jail, and then he fell in love with the jailer's daughter, and he wrote her a letter signed, love your Valentine, and or your love Valentine. Anyway, completely made up.
Yeah.
And it's completely made up. But a lot of people believe, they'll read it somewhere and then they repeat it. And this is how these like urban myths and legends grow. You read it somewhere, you repeat it often enough, it becomes truth. There were a lot of Saint Valentines because it was a very popular Italian name at the time. So there are at least 10 of them, and nobody knows anything about their life or like historical actual facts related to their lives. And so so that story of Saint Valentine, um, there there was a pope who declared Saint Valentine's Day at the same time of the Lupercalia festival, which was, or Lupercalia, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, was a more pagan festival in ancient Rome, where there were young men who were like essentially naked. Maybe they had like a loincloth on, and they would run around whipping young ladies with strips of goat hide. And if a young woman or a lady or a woman was whipped, then it meant that she would be fertile. And so it was this like fertility game. And so it was, again, like sexually promiscuous. It was a time when, social norms were looser. And so the overlay of, well, now this is St. Valentine's Day, was the Christian attempt to rename and reclaim that festival for something more pious, more boring, more, and so so then again, what happened is that original Saint Valentine, he had nothing to do with love or romance. He was just a Christian saint, which is essentially somebody who was martyred in the name of Christianity. Somebody early on who was unwilling to, when Christianity was illegal, who was unwilling to not declare their faith and therefore murdered. And so St. Valentine's Day was declared to overshadow the Lupercalia festival. And and then Chaucer actually mentioned, he was in a poem, he was mentioning the mating birds in the springtime on this St. Valentine's Day. And then somehow some other writer during that time period took that reference, they referenced Chaucer referencing the mating birds and the St. Valentine's Day. And from there, again, it just became urban myth and legend that St. Valentine's Day was about romance and mating. And it sort of came full circle back to the original meaning of fertility in springtime. Then you have, so then you've got, again, the commercial layer where greeting card companies start getting involved. And anyway, it spins out into commercialism. But again, you just have this multi-layered, tangled history where it started with something that was much more connected to nature and these cultures that were paying attention to the passing of the seasons and the way that this biology interacted with these seasonal rhythms, overlaid by Christianity, overlaid by Victorian ideals, overlaid by commercialism. So sort of similar to Easter in that they're both kind of spring holidays. One is earlier spring, obviously, but yeah.
That's a great, thank you for turning that all around to look at the different sides of the structure there. Because it's becoming apparent to me that sequencing of the paganism, which I mean has certainly a negative connotation. I mean, maybe that's just my own bias from having grown up Christian Catholic, and I mean anything pagan is
absolutely, paganism is demonized, and really it's all the belief systems that came before and outside of Christianity. That's all pagan. That's what pagan means.
And there are still shades of that, in the specters of that in Christianity. I mean, it's a pagan
ideal
to consume a body and blood.
That was the whole thing that the Puritans were against, right? Because they believed that Roman Catholicism, which again, you can, all the holidays that I've talked about, the Roman Catholic Church came in and tried to align existing ceremonies with a new Christian meaning. So they felt that if they gave the pagans their holidays, but with a new meaning, they would have a better chance of converting them. So the Puritans were saying, this isn't pure Christianity, this is paganism in disguise, right? And so that's sort of, that like it, Christmas, to come back full circle to our midwinter time and festival, Christmas was actually outlawed in the colonies in the 1600s for a period of, I think, 22 years, because Christmas was still carrying the traditions of of old pagan rituals, and specifically and especially Saturnalia,
Mm-hmm.
which was the ancient Roman festival of a time. It was more like carnival. It was this complete time of upside downness and role reversal, gambling, debauchery, lots of alcohol, gorging, cross dressing. It was just this time of anything goes, and inversion, really social, just complete inversion of society. And that was bubbling up again in the colonies, and the Puritans and the elites were just not having it. And so they actually were able to outlaw what we call Christmas. Didn't look anything like what we know as Christmas today. It was this drinking heavily and rowdiness in the streets, parades in the streets, mumming, which was a form of going door to door. The lower classes would go to the wealthy manors, and they would put on plays. It was called mumming or wassailing. Here we go, we're wassailing, right? Oh, give us some figgy pudding. We won't go until we get some. So they would put on these plays or sing these songs in demand of alcohol or sweets or money. And that was the cultural exchange that was very accepted in the old world. And all the, at least in ancient Rome, all of the various levels of society participated willingly. And then, in the colonies, the elites started to pull away and say, like, shut their doors and say, no, we're not going to give you money. We're not going to give you our cider in the basement,
Yeah.
and then, that very quickly turned sour. Violence escalated, vandalism, all of these things. And so, they're outlawing Christmas. And essentially what happened was a very small group of intellectual elites essentially rebranded Christmas, again, domesticated the holiday. And you have Clement Clark Moore with his The Night Before Christmas poem, which sort of got the ball rolling. And, this jolly old Saint Nick and his 8 tiny reindeer, Saint Nicholas, Santa Claus. They said the house of ale would not be vanquished by the house of God. So they came up with a new deity, and that deity was Santa Claus.
Damn.
So, yeah. And so, and they cherry picked from imagery and romanticized, sometimes obscure references from old world pagan traditions, because they wanted the masses to feel romantically plugged into their past, but they literally dreamt up a new tame holiday that would be celebrated within the walls of the parlor. There would be no more mixing and mingling of the classes. This was really a strategic move to separate, to maintain the separation of the classes, and to shift this rowdy behavior into something much more manageable.
And it's been a success from that respect. I mean,
it has been a success.
We can't. God forbid we had the classes mingling, Laura. God forbid.
Yes, yeah, God forbid. Agreed. So
and that's the great illusion, just to say a word for that briefly, to have a smattering of elements from different traditions gives that veneer of validity, and
it becomes an urban myth that, these traditions just rode over on the Mayflower and organically just percolated into our culture, and this old tradition of Saint Nicholas, when in fact there wasn't really a large Dutch presence where the myth of Santa Claus originally sprung up in the colonies. It came from, again, these English elites that were largely from Britain. They weren't Dutch settlers, but they borrowed that Dutch Sinterklaas, and then they recreated him, and they literally rebranded Christmas, and it was very successful. Yeah.
Greatest empire of all time. And I because I don't know if it's because we have such a short memory, or because our histories have been manipulated such as they have been, that we forget that social engineers do their best to touch every lever of influence and control, and that includes our shared myths, especially when those, because every empire has assumed some level of the myths, and the Romans especially. I mean, the Romans, the research I've done on that, there are plenty of organic Roman cultures, but they borrowed so much from the Greeks, and the Greeks from the Egyptians. And there's this constant assumption and assimilation as the eras go on. And as I said, I mean, just now, American history is so young. I know people don't have, I mean, to the degree that I had a classical education, I think I was very lucky to go to Catholic school, Jesuit school, to take Latin and Greek courses, and that, my real education has taken place every day after I left school, and that's how it goes ideally. But I know that there is a pervasive level of ignorance where people are not able to appreciate that where we find ourselves in the human myth uh,
Yeah.
is it is a very microscopic view
Yeah.
of who we are. I mean, we still don't have a lot of clarity on who we are, where we came from, where we're going, and that's fine. I can live
Yeah.
in that mystery. I still have a yearning for these sacred rites that bring me closer to great spirit, the spirits that guide us, ancestors, something that makes me
Truth.
feel connected,
Right.
very very much so. And
Yeah.
I know something is true to the degree that I don't have a monopoly on truth. I don't have a direct line to truth, but I know something is true when it happens to me, and I would love that to
I
be
think
our
part of
segue
what's
into.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's also part of something that's interesting about our traditions is people get very protective and attached to their traditions, and they're like, oh, this is tradition, and I'm sure there's, there can be some blowback when I when I talk about these things, and it's like, oh, you're such a party pooper, or no, these traditions are so important to our family. Like, why are you, trying to do away with them, or like, just anger at taking these traditions away. And I'm not trying to take them away. I'm
No,
trying to ask us to be aware of where they actually came from, and then make a conscious choice if that's how you want to continue celebrating or not, based on the fact that this wasn't like this organic sacred thing that was passed down to you through generations of your family line. This was something that's already been manipulated and spoon fed to you in order to shift your behavior. Now that you know that, what do you want? How do you want to celebrate? I'm not saying like you have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. If there's some parts of the way that you celebrate that make you feel good, that bring meaning to your life, by all means, carry on, but let's just go about it consciously instead of unconsciously.
brilliantly said, and it aligns with something I spoke to recently on a podcast about awareness coupled with discernment. It's that old saying, when you know better, you do better, and it does benefit us to have a greater awareness of as much of the source story as we can, to then discern, is this something that I really feel aligned with? Is there a lot of truth and wisdom and goodness and beauty in this story, or will I do my best to create a new? And that doesn't make it
Mhm.
totally devoid of meaning. We can seek and create the meaning. And as I said, I mean, I
And I
find
think
something. Go ahead.
I think this is what Alec Zeck is really doing as well, right? With his Confluence family, is all these people coming together and saying, what do we want moving forward? What does our view, what does our inspiration of what it means to be human and to be in this human family look like? And that we don't have to just accept everything that's been curated and handed to us. That we are creative beings, and we can step back and create what we're wanting, and the beautiful vision that we see for
Certainly.
ourselves and for humanity. Yeah.
Certainly, and that does, as best we can, become a conscious choice. We make plenty of unconscious choices, and so
Right.
we are tasked with that, perpetual schooling of how many choices can I visit within myself that I can turn from unconscious to conscious. And
Right.
when it comes to ritual and how we recognize the important passages of the times of the year and the cycles of our lives, I can tell you from my experience. Again, I know something is true when I have the experience of it. What I feel is real to a large degree, as much as I can achieve the stillness to know that what I have felt does actually come from within me. I think that's true for the most part, that no one is really going to make you feel something. An emotion is stirred, but that was something I learned from Steiner as well. If we come to a place of equanimity, of stillness, where I am not easily swayed by what happens outside of me, I can recognize that it is really that anger is something that comes from within me. Yes, there is an external stimuli, but that naturally happens within me. And I enjoyed a lot of, first of all, stillness, from then to go forth and
Mm.
have the experience. And uh it was very impactful, Laura, for me and my love as well, to have certainly the time getting ready for the 13 holy nights this last year.
Yeah.
And even though we're at different checkpoints along the spiritual path, we both shared that the good kind of anticipation where we're looking forward to seeing what our experience is that reflects, this certain month of the upcoming year. If you would please give us your stage setting of
Yeah.
these 13 holy nights, and then I would love to share with you my two stories from the months of August and September that again
Yeah.
have revealed to me the truth,
Yeah.
because I had an experience with my own oracular
Yeah. So
guides.
this is kind of the 13 Sacred Nights practice as I present it in the book and in the Oracle deck is a practice that appeals to, our modern lives. So it's a modern take on that ancient pagan wisdom, on a a a ritual that asks us to lean into the darkness and the stillness of the midwinter season. And so it is a time to do two things. The first thing we're doing is really just paying attention. We're being present to everything that is streaming in during that time. So we are almost capturing the first imprint of light as it streams in. So we've passed through the darkest point of the year, the solstice. And after the solstice, the sun appears to stand still. Sol, sun, si stere, stand still on the horizon for 3 days. And then when it begins to move again, we begin the practice of the sacred night. So the first sacred night corresponds to the entire year to come, or the entire cycle of seasons to come. The second holy night is a reflection of January, the third holy night February, the fourth holy night March, and so on. So what we're doing is we're capturing kind of a blueprint or a roadmap or an imprint of the coming cycle that's going to be our guide, right, for the coming year. And during this 13-day window, again, we're capturing that first light. So it's almost like, if the universe is fractal in nature, it's like you're capturing the first bit of the fractal of the coming year, which then is going to expand and unfold, throughout the remainder of the year. So, well, how do you receive? What do you even mean by that, Lara? What does that look like, right? So there's a few things, but basically you're just getting really present and you're writing everything down in a journal. So present to what? Present to the events and happenings that are unfolding in the external world in your life, and present to the things that are unfolding internally, your thoughts and emotions, and you're journaling it all. And so you might also ideally find some time to just sit in silence and internally ask the question, what is here for me now? And then when you come out of that meditation, journal about what came up for you during that time of structured quiet and stillness. And then, of course, there's the drawing of the oracle cards, which brings a little structure and a little bit more obvious guidance for those of us where, journaling might feel just a little bit too intangible, or being present might feel a little bit too intangible. So that's the receiving bit. The second thing that we're doing that I was referring to is consciously planting our dream seeds in the fertile soil of the darkness. So they'll sprout in the spring, bloom into the full expansiveness of summer. Again, you're living the dream. In the fall, we're appreciating the richness, harvesting the fruits of our labor before diving back in for another cycle. So the things that you're wanting for the new year, for the new cycle, rather than just writing down a list of New Year's resolutions, you're actually doing those things. If you want to do more exercising, make sure you do that during the 13 sacred nights. If you want to do more cooking, make sure you do that during the 13 sacred nights. If you want a certain person in your life, make sure you reach out to them. More meditation, more hula hooping, whatever it is, like you just make sure you do those things during that window of time, because you are creating hand in hand with source, with God, spirit, whatever you want to call it. You are co-creating the initial imprint for the entire coming cycle. And as you know, Tom, it is just laugh out loud, goosebump inducing how the things that you experienced during that window and that you write down in your journal, either word for word, end up unfolding in your life later, or very often quite metaphorically in a way that you could never have anticipated, and is totally hilarious because the divine definitely has a sense of humor, but the journal notes that you capture end up just being priceless wisdom, guidance later in the year, just give you exactly what you needed to hear to help you shift your perspective, move through something with a little more grace, with a little more faith that there is indeed some greater design that's unfolding here that is magical and mystical that we, can trust in. And so that's a quick imprint of the Sacred Nights practice.
Well, consider this my testimonial from my own experience. And first of all, there's going to be two lucky listeners. One of you, you may know who you are by this point, who will be receiving the OG version of the
The
Holy Night.
OG,
Yep.
sweet.
And then I, as a gift from me to circulate this magical, truly magical practice. And yeah, as my testimonial, I mean, because thankfully I have my love with me, who's always asking me, what's your spirit guide for this month, and what do you
Yeah.
think about it? And so, so if we can harken back to the time of what was January the 1st, in this year, 2025. I don't say the year of our Lord, because who knows what year this is, but no matter.
Yeah.
Um, so this was applicable to the month of August. So January 1st, I was literally day 2 or 3 into my new tennis coaching job, and I've never. I mean, I
Okay.
had coached tennis last summer. It was very much a youth program, so it wasn't that intensive, teaching the kids. I take it very seriously, but also with a lot of levity, because it's kids. So you gotta have. I'm the jester, as well as the coach, as well as the teacher, as well as so many different hats with that. But this is
Yeah.
real. We're called tennis pros. Professional tennis teachers, instructors, and I was very new into it. And a lot of it is much more entertainer than educator. I found when I started these aerobic doubles clinics, and highly active, and I found myself shouting a lot. And I had been, for especially for me, Laura, as extroverted and as much as I love to connect with people and have deep, I prefer deep connections. I really don't go much in for the superficial connections. But I was in my own, you know, dark night of the soul and incubation these last several years. I was not really out much a lot connecting with people, especially not in this performance type role. And so, I was just reflecting on just how strained I felt, because it was a very new experience for me. And still, I was navigating this at the same time that I had invited the dolphin to my
Mm-hmm.
wisdom council for the month of August.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my first time really speaking about this, and I'm happy to share this with you, especially now that I'm on the other side. That
Yeah.
for the entire month of August, is essentially this year, I lost my voice,
Wow.
and I in the throes of that, because my voice is very important to me. I mean, I have this podcast for a reason. I only know, I joke with people, I only know 2 languages, English and vulgarity. So, I have to do my best to communicate through those 2 languages. And still, I was very active in my coaching job, and people all the time that I've been there have always commented on my energy and my enthusiasm, how vocal and supportive I am. And so this was a huge gut check for me to, I had to be succinct and effective with my words. And
Yeah.
but in the throes of that, as we all go through in our health initiations, there was, of course, I do trust in the brilliance of my body. I was trying to first rationally reason through why this might be happening to me. And only after about a couple weeks of consternation and frustration did I turn back to my journal. And
Mm.
if I can just mention this briefly, because I think I had maybe glanced at the first couple lines of the dolphin as a guide for
Yeah.
playfulness, and I think that the intelligence, especially the relational intelligence that comes in. What
Mm-hmm.
I did not know was that dolphin medicine also speaks to us of the power and importance of the breath.
Yeah.
And when I finally read that, after about 3 or 4 weeks of, like I said, the frustration and not having my breath constantly, and it wasn't just
Mm.
that hoarseness and inflammation, it was that, I could not conjure up the breath energy to express myself to someone 50 feet away. I mean, and even
Yeah.
I would come home at night and I would be whispering to Jordan.
Lung
And
congestion. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
but only at that time, when I revisited this spirit guide, did I feel more comfortable going into breath work and learning practicing what I've learned from Brooke McPoyle, and actually training my diaphragm a little bit more. And that coincided with much more of a heartfelt experience that I had to shift from, out of my brain and realized that there was a particular event that I learned about someone, intimate in my life that was quite actually hard to swallow and that I could not
Mm,
speak my full truth to.
mm,
And that conjunction right there of knowing that I had a guide who was encouraging me to tap into my breath and, the deeper seated soul level reality that I had been hurt by someone and I couldn't really speak to it and I was choking on that. Only then was I able to transition into
mm.
the healing where I actually have my voice now. And I don't mean to skate over that. I just have a lot more detail and depth that I'll be sharing on a different podcast. And then one night in early September, earlier this month, as I was going to sleep, and then the very next morning, I said to Jordan, my love, as we rose together the next day, I said, after again similar frustrations and just this time in my life where I am keen to do more harvesting and I know I'm planting a lot of seeds and still I feel this limitation, a lot of these limits that I put on myself. And I woke up one morning and I said, I'm tired of feeling fearful.
Mm,
And later that day, again, I just said, I wonder, who my guide is for this time. And it is the lynx in the month of
mm,
September. And what I have written down here, and this came to me in a meditation on January the 2nd, to me, I had no exact tether to what I would be experiencing in the month of September. I wrote down two questions, Laura. In which parts of myself will I commit to bring change? And where do I need to be more courageous? And
mm,
that for me was that perfect synchronicity where I already had that feeling well up in me that it is
mm.
time that I confront this whatever limitation I have where I just feel the change is needed because I'm feeling pain. I'm feeling um sort of stifled. I'm feeling that I'm not able to really unleash all this vitality and passion and desire to be of service to people, to provide for my family, to live in a as much of an embodied expression of who I feel myself to be as possible. And I know how much of that is limited by fear. And I have
Mhm.
long felt I have a dear brother, Matthew Coleman, who I met through that men's group I was telling you about. His spirit animal for a long time has been the jaguar, and I
Mm.
feel very akin with predatory cats. Or I just love
Yeah.
that as an athlete. I am very drawn to that cat energy. But that question, especially, I mean, my Jordan's jaw hit the floor, especially when I said, where do I need to be more courageous? And that has launched
Mm.
me into an alchemical time of investigation. And I am guided by the links, which, just I can share this with people. I literally just flipped right to it. I had no bookmark as well, but
Yeah.
just the subtitle to the links is Silence, the Sacred Chalice, Attentive Listening, and the Power of Words and Divine Wisdom. So I went from this time where I also had that feeling when I lost my voice of, okay, I have two ears and one mouth for a reason.
Yeah.
If I'm going to have a response to anyone as a coach, as someone I'm in relationship with, as a friend, whomever, I do need to embrace the dual potency of being able to listen first to what someone is really sharing with me so then I can deliver as succinct and effective a response as I can. And that has absolutely helped level up my approach to coaching and how I am able to
Oh,
interact
yeah.
with people. So I'm sure this is old hat for you at this point to hear people's stories of how their guides visit them and nudge them toward just more enlightenment within. But those are my
No,
two
it's
testimonials.
profound, and
Yeah,
when it happens to you, it just feels it's like, it's like I said, laugh out loud, goosebump
yeah,
inducing, because you just go like, oh my gosh, could it be any more perfect? And it's such a that bless Jordan for reminding you to check in
oh
with your
yeah,
journal, because that's also something that happens is a lot of times people will do the ritual during the sacred nights themselves, the 13 nights, and then forget to check in with their journal throughout the year, which is so sad because
yeah,
like they have this rich treasure trove of guidance, and then it goes by the wayside, which the practice itself is profound and powerful in so many ways. We're learning to walk through 13 days on the mat, so to speak, right? We
yeah,
take the meditation into our life. It's not a 20-minute meditation in the morning or a 1 hour meditation or even a 2 hour meditation. It's 13 days of learning to walk awake to the conversation that your consciousness is always engaged in with the divine, whether you recognize it or not. So we're waking to the dream, really, right? And so just doing the practice and coming back to it year after year after year is really profound and powerful. But then to have this guidance throughout the year and to discover these synchronicities and these moments where we go back to our journal and we go, oh, wow, yes, I see this is so helpful, or this aligns, or this gives me this new perspective, is a deepening and a concretizing of our faith in the world of spirit or source or God or the mystery, and the more that we tune in and pay attention and recognize the sacred all around us, and recognize these patterns and these rhythms and these synchronicities unfolding, the more we see it, the more we believe it, and the more we believe it, the more it manifests in our life. So it feeds on itself, right? And so there's so much beauty in this practice, which is why I fell in love with it, which is why I couldn't help but tell everybody that I knew about it, which is why somehow I ended up creating an Oracle deck and becoming the holiday girl and sharing all this information with the world. But I do want to say, I want to tell you a story because I know we're getting closer or over on time. But
yeah, we'll land the plane soon. But take it away. I only have one other question.
But I want to tell you that when I left Confluence, I had a few cases of Oracle decks left. I brought a whole bunch of Oracle decks because I knew that I was, coming up on the end of when I was going to be able to distribute the original decks, and per my contract with my publishers. And I had a few cases left, just a couple. I came with I packed my whole car full, like to the ceiling with, so I did distribute most of them, but I had a few cases left. And I thought, I don't want to come home with an Oracle deck. So I thought, well, I'll go to, I will go to Sedona. And that seems like an Oracle deck friendly town. And I'll just go see if I can distribute some of these in shops or to strangers that feel like there's a, magical twinkle in their eye or, whatever, So I stopped. I had already been driving the whole day before and slept in my Subaru overnight and was feeling, kind of gross. So I pulled over to this empty parking lot and I'm changing my clothes and brushing my hair and, getting freshened up to walk into stores cold and offer them my deck. And this cyclist goes by and then he circles back. And remember, I'm fresh off a Confluence. So I'm like feeling magical and high on life and all the things, and I'm generally open human anyway, but he cycles back and he comes and he says, would you believe me if I said that God told me that I needed to come back and talk to you? And I said, sure. Yeah, I could believe that, I believe these things. And we started chatting and, essentially he was bringing a message of Jesus. And listen, I have an open relationship and inquiry with what I think of as the unfathomable love, light, and sound of the Christos being or the Christ being or Jesus Christ. I don't, anyway. So I'm open to his conversation and this conversation and everything else. And he pulls a Bible out of his backpack and offers me a Bible. And I'm like, okay, sure. And he's reading some, he's got places thumbtacked that he opens up to and reads and recites. And so I said, well, would you like one of these books? And I offer him an Oracle deck and he sees what it is and he says, oh no. And essentially he tells me that what I'm doing with this Oracle deck is opening demon portals, And so we end our thing and I take his Bible gift and, get back in the car. And I like really have a moment where, I'm talking to, again, what some people call Jesus Christ and what I tend to more think of as the love, light, and sound of a divine being that is part of humanity, connected to humanity. And I said, it's not my intention to be opening demon portals. Like, I don't, my intention here is to contribute love to humanity and while I'm here on the earth. And if I'm not doing that, like, please let me know. because I can do other things. I do neurogenic qigong. I do trauma release
Yeah.
work. I wear many hats. Like I could, I got all kinds of things that I can go do. Like I don't need to be distributing this oracle deck if I'm opening demon portals. And I was serious. Like I was crying. It really affected me. And so I just said that prayer, like, listen, my intention is to contribute love, and if I'm not doing that, please let me know. Like I'll do something else. I don't have to be doing this. And yet, like, this practice has helped me get closer to God. I know that for a fact, right? And so I drive away. And as I'm driving away, Tom, I get a ding on my phone, or I text I don't remember, it was an Instagram or something notification, and you had left me a voice text. And literally, this is like minutes, like less than 10 minutes, like 2 minutes after I get this talking to from, the Bible biker, and Bible biker Bob, and we'll call him. And you leave me 2 minutes or 3 minutes of just so much love and appreciation, going on and on and on about how this practice has positively brought more life and love and connection into your life and your relationship with Jordan, and how you're both just so immensely grateful. And you specifically said something about how I bring so much love to everything that I do. You literally said that. You said you bring so much love to everything that you do. And I was just, Niagara Falls. It was like, okay, Jesus, got it. I got the message. And then, as if that wasn't enough, that was the answer to my prayer right there, because it was so precisely timed. It was one of those like, okay, well, clearly this is my answer, but then, as if that wasn't enough, I went to a cafe to get some food. I sat down outside and started chatting with a woman sitting there who was a local woman, turns out. And I started sharing with her what had just happened with this man who had approached. I was alone in a parking lot, totally empty parking lot by myself. He cycles by, comes back, and approaches me. And she goes, wait a minute, was he wearing like a bunch of like elbow pads and like a bunch of like he looked like a really professional cyclist? And I'm like, yeah. And she goes, he did the exact same thing to me. And she said, I was all alone. I was totally isolated. I was on like a balcony in an empty parking lot. And he made it seem like it was this big coincidence and God had spoken to him, and, and this whole thing. So I'm like, oh, so he's just going around, and every time he sees a woman alone that's vulnerable, he's going and telling her that God is speaking to him directly, and that, he's whatever. So, and I did give him some pushback in our conversation, because
I'm sure.
like, he but friendly,
Sure.
but he was like, this your book is opening demon portals, and I was like, well, what if there was no cards with the book? What if it was just a book that was sharing somebody's thoughts on God? And he was like, well, Jesus will never speak to you through a book. That's why he always comes through a person like me. And I said, but 5 minutes ago, you told me that humans can also, have possession. And, so anyway, it doesn't matter. But the point is that, I don't think you are aware until maybe right now of what a huge role you played in solving that inner conundrum for me, and putting me at ease, and helping me know that I am, in fact, doing what I intend to do, which is just to add more love and to help people get closer to their, to God, individually, in the way that that's right for them in their journey. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, Tom, for that message that you left, that you had no idea was divinely timed.
It's the very least I can do to recognize, and this is so much of my own purpose with this podcast, is to recognize and then circulate the energy that I feel emanating from people like yourself, who are lighting up so many fires within me just by dint of being you, and leaning into that, where you find your own love and light and reverberation of sound, where you feel like this is really it. And yeah, synchronicity is very much that divine comical language, and it's always fun to hear those stories. If I had an ultimate question, and thank you for all these insights, I have no regrets from our time together. It's just I can
Yeah.
tell that I would certainly love another opportunity to delve into neurogenic qigong and
Oh yeah.
so much more of your story that you
Yeah.
continue to craft and share with us. So one thing that occurs to me, as much as I care about language and every, how we express truth through, the throat, the mouth, all of that. Um, I've never worn contacts or glasses or anything like that, and still I'm obsessed with vision because I am seeing that this is the holistic worldview that I embrace. That there is really no difference between our physical, uh, our organs of vision, our eyes connected to our brain, and our oracular ability to see within, and then sometimes even anticipate without. And the language we use to observe holidays. I know that's most common, in Judaism, but for all of us, the fact that we choose to observe a holiday, that there is a recognition and awareness that goes into
Hmm.
our embracing of holiday rituals. And so I'm curious for yourself and you and your daughter, what is it that you've seen transpire over all these years of actually recognizing and observing such a significant sacred holiday as these holy nights? What have you seen change in your life? And we don't exist in as an island. Your life is connected to others. So what's at least one observation you've made as you've leaned into the holy nights practices?
Oh gosh. Well, I think, I've already spoken to it a little bit, but I've been on a path of seeking for, I don't know, definitely over 2 decades, and teaching yoga years and years ago. I went from teaching yoga to teaching and practicing qigong, and and more than any other practice, I can genuinely say that this practice has taught me to wake up to the divine conversation that we are always taking part in, whether we recognize it or not. And that's, I mean, that's about as profound as it gets, really. It's just gently over the years in this really delightful way. It's this holiday practice, right? And it's this drawing of the oracle cards and lighting candles, and it's sweet and it's delightful and yet profound. And over the years, it's the practice of being present for 13 days and recognizing that my thoughts and my feelings and my emotions and everything that's happening and everything that I'm taking in is all fractally related to my future and my past, is beginning to wake up to that truth is beyond profound. So I would say that, yeah, that's just been a pretty mind blowing result of returning to the sacred nights year after year.
Well, now I just feel like you're bragging because you're telling me that you speak English and Divine as the two languages that you know. So I
And
guess
Spanish,
and Spanish. Okay, all right.
a
So
little bit of Portuguese and
all
American
right,
Sign
all
Language.
right, yeah, we're cutting the mics there. My ego can't handle someone having the last word in four different languages. So rest assured that you and I will connect on how to make sure that people can access
Yeah,
the sacred nights for this time of the year. But
yeah.
any final, I will do any final PSA that you'd wish to put out there.
Yeah, it's well now that I'm no longer, that I have actual publishers. I'm not responsible for distribution. It's on all the things. It's at Barnes and Noble. It's on Amazon. It's on Simon and Schuster. It's at Beyond Words. It's on Books a Million, Books.org, all the places. So very accessible, which is a good thing because I could only take it so far as one woman show. And then I do also offer a guided experience where we're going to go through the sacred nights together as a Zoom group. And there will be 4 live classes and then a whole bunch of recorded meditations. And I'll be combining the practices of Qigong with the sacred nights and then just a whole lot of guidance. And then we're going to actually get together once a month throughout the remainder of the year to check in. do some more meditation, do some more practice, pay attention to what has unfolded, what our guides are moving forward, and just kind of keep each other on track and plugged in together. So you can go to my website. It's larajday.com, and all that information is there.
That's fantastic. Thank you for offering that because, to whomever's listening, and this will be a reminder to myself as well, it would be not even an investment to take the leap and procure a treasure like that for yourself. I feel like we need to get away from thinking of these things as expenses or indulgences to invest in our spiritual growth. That is the procurement of um, a very rich spiritual treasure. So I'm
Yeah.
grateful to you for putting in the good work and play to bring forth those fruits. And I'm so looking forward to staying connected on this journey that we find ourselves on. So, Lara, thank you so much for
Yeah.
joining me today.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah.